introduce you, I was thinking something like author, speaker, and consultant, or another way you like to say
Yeah,
it.
I usually don't put speaker in there just because,
Okay.
that's marketing stuff. Like I don't consider myself much of a
Okay.
public speaker, but I usually, instead of saying get a consultant, I say I'm an expert. So, I
Positioning
would
expert.
like, yeah, so I'm a positioning expert and author, April Dunford. You could do that. That's
Okay.
fine.
Welcome to the Digital Accomplice podcast. Today I'm joined by April Dunford, who is a positioning expert and author. Welcome to the show.
It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I like to get things going with a nice win that you've had recently. What would be a recent content marketing success that you've enjoyed?
Well, it's interesting. So this isn't actually my success, but I'm going to talk about it anyways because I'm so proud of these folks. so, so I have a company. They're not a client of mine. They're just friends of mine. But we've sat on a couple of calls together, and they've been wrestling with a new positioning thing. And one of the things that I've been talking to them about is how difficult it is for B2B purchasers to make a purchase. And we don't often think about that. Like, a big technology purchase is actually quite difficult. And so folks going through the purchase process don't really know, how should I be evaluating my options? Who should be on my short list and why? What's important purchase criteria and what isn't? And so the advice I gave these folks is, I said, look, when I was a VP marketing, if you hired me as a VP marketing and we were selling a complicated big B2B thing, I always built a buyer's guide. And this is a piece of content that always works. Like it always works because it's hard for people to figure this out. And the reason why it's such a great piece of content is, one, anybody that downloads the buyer's guide, they're in a purchase process. Why are they looking at the buyer's guide anyway? Right. So it's a great hand raiser signal to indicate, okay, these folks are in active purchase process. We should maybe get a sales rep reaching out to them. We should try to get, we should try to hit them with some stuff. So that's one. And then the second thing is, it solves this real problem for a B2B buyer in a purchase process. If you can design this buyer's guide right, you can make the case for, look, here's the way the different types of solutions are categorized. Here are the pros and cons of different types of solutions. If you're a customer that looks like this, we believe your purchase criteria should look more or less like this, and make the case for it. And so, anyway, so I gave these guys this tip. I said, you should do buyer's guide. Buyer's guide always works, blah, blah, blah. So they went and did the buyer's guide. So the guy sent me an email today and he's like, holy cow, the buyer's guide is working out really good. And specifically, they had the CEO, which surprised me, of a very big company reach out to them and say, I downloaded your buyer's guide. I read it twice. I downloaded it but I didn't even have you guys on the short list. I just thought it was intriguing. You had a buyer's guide for this kind of a solution. I read it twice, and I didn't put you guys on the list because I disliked you for this reason, this reason, this reason. But after I read the buyer's guide twice, I really changed my mind about how I needed to evaluate this stuff. So now you're on the list. So now we want to have a call. And I was like, yes.
Yeah, buyer's guide for the win, folks. That's how you win with
Buyer's
content
guide for
marketing.
the win. And so
Yeah.
so they just sent me that email yesterday, so it was top of mind. So when I knew I was going on this podcast, I was like, I got to talk about buyer's guides, because honestly, I cannot believe that if you are selling a complicated B2B thing, like, if you don't have a buyer's guide, that's just, you need to have one. You need to go get one.
There you
It's
go.
it's a it's a tactic that always works.
So we're on the first question. We've already got actionable advice.
There you go. Actionable advice. If you're selling B2B, now if it's consumer, you don't do that so much.
Yeah.
But if it's a considered purchase, like something where people are lining up their options, they're trying to make a decision. And usually a purchase like this, a purchaser doesn't do it every day. Like, they might actually do it once in their careers. And so they don't know how to buy this stuff. They have no idea. And so buyer's guide is actually super helpful.
Yeah.
Always
That's
works.
that's a great tip. So on the flip side, what would you say would be your biggest marketing challenge right now, and what are you doing about it?
Well, so for me personally, I'm a consultant, and I do positioning work with B2B tech companies, and I do a lot of work with companies that have somewhat, complicated things, and we work on the positioning and the sales pitch. And so most folks find out about me through my books. Like I have a couple of books that are quite popular, so people read them there. Some people follow me on social media, and I get a little bit of that, but not too much. I have a newsletter with a reasonable number of subscribers, not big, but so I'm thinking about ways to expand my reach that isn't the book. And so I've been a guest on podcasts like this for a long time. I was really wrestling with the idea, should I have my own podcast? And the thing that really stuck out to me, and maybe because I'm the positioning lady, so I'm obsessed with positioning, but I was like, how do I have my own podcast and position myself as the expert? Because if I have an interview podcast like this, now I'm just the interviewer and the other person is the expert, but I want to be the expert. So I know how to do that when I'm the guest. I don't know how to do that when I'm not the guest. So so I sat on this for like a year, and then I finally launched a, a podcast. And the idea is it was going to be mainly a solo show. So it would be for positioning geeks. Like, so you want to go really deep on an aspect of positioning. I'll do a solo episode and say, okay, today we're talking about best fit customer segment and how do we get to that? Or today we're talking about how do you position when you have multiple products inside a company? Do you have to do the company positioning first? And then these are geeky,
Yeah.
down in the
Yeah.
weeds positioning things. And I launched this thing and everybody told me, you had to do it regular every week. And I ran it for 6 months. And I never had a single client after doing this thing, episode 6 months, I never had a single client come to me and say, yeah, I listened to that podcast, even though I have lots of listeners. And so I'm like, man, this thing isn't working for business. and, and I'm like, who are all these people that are listening? And what I was getting was a lot of commentary on LinkedIn or people like, I love your podcast, but these people are all marketing consultants. So so that made me sad. And after 6 months, I decided, but this is a failed experiment. So I called time on it. And in my mind, that was going to be the end of it. And so, so how to solve that problem was I'm just going to stop doing it. It was an experiment. The experiment failed. I'm not doing that. But I had one guy, he was a client of mine, a CEO, and I do have the occasional guest. And so I wanted to get him on the show because he's really smart and I love what he's doing with his company. And his company's quite well known. And I thought, oh, people are going to love this. And I never did schedule him. But like 2 months after I decided to cancel the podcast, he sends me an email and says, I'm ready. Let's do it. And I was like, am I going to do an entire season 2 just because one guy wants to do the podcast? And I sat with it overnight and then I was like, yes, I am. So I started it again. So we'd been on break for like 3, 4 months. And I relaunched the whole thing. And my first episode is, me and this guy. And then I'm doing a bunch of solo episodes. So the format hasn't changed. The only thing I changed was instead of doing it every week, I was going to do it every second week because it was, I'm not convinced this works and I'm not really committed to keep it doing it. And I thought, well, I'm going to do 3, 4 months of this. And the curious thing that happened is now everybody that calls me mentions the podcast.
Interesting.
And so I don't think I ran the experiment for long enough, is my conclusion.
That
And then
dovetails nicely with what I understand to be the case with building an audience. Yeah.
yeah, it didn't. Well, and it's funny because the audience numbers were high and they're not much higher now. Like the thing is growing, but it's a slow burn. And like, let's face it, it's a super weird nichey topic. Like, you wouldn't go there unless you're a positioning weirdo, basically. And so, I think people find my podcast and they binge listen to the thing, but I'm not sure there's the audience for this thing is big, but I don't care as long as it's the right people.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's funny. It was a slower burn than I thought.
Yeah.
But anyway, now clients call me and they all have what either watch the show on YouTube or listen to the audio version of it.
Yeah.
So I'm super surprised. I thought 6 months would be long enough,
Yeah.
but it wasn't.
Yeah. That's a good story and example of what can happen. So yeah.
Yeah.
So other than the video podcast that we're doing right now, How else might you be using video, and what's working there and what's not for you?
So when I launched my own podcast, I had this big debate about whether or not I was going to do video because video is expensive compared to just doing audio podcast. But literally everyone I talked to that was doing a podcast said, you got to do video, blah, blah, blah. It's really important. Um, and so I launched it, and I got a YouTube channel with exactly 0 subscribers, right? So I launched it with 0. This was depressing. And at the end of 6 months, I think I had 900 subscribers. And so that number 900 does not sound very good. But again, and if you look at where I'm at now, there's, a few thousand subscribers or something. But what's interesting is um it punches above its weight because it's the right people. So anybody subscribing to this thing is really interested in this stuff. And again, what I'm getting is my clients will find it. And so they're not necessarily subscribing, the people that are interested in working with me, but there's something about video that gives them a vibe for what I'm all about. And it's interesting how much people watch the video and how important that is. Now, I'll tell you another interesting video story is and for my stuff, I think this is very true. Like for me, it's not about reach. It's about reach to the right people. And so I'll give you an example. I was on a podcast because I like being a guest on podcasts. So I was on a podcast, a very, very popular podcast called The Knowledge Project. It's run by this guy, Shane Parrish. He's also Canadian. And he invited me to come to Ottawa and do it at his house, which I thought, oh, this is going to be really cool. And I was going to Ottawa for something anyway. I don't live that far away. So I went into Ottawa. We recorded at his house, which was super cool. And he does amazing production value. I mean, he's a media guy, like, and he has this super popular podcast and a newsletter. Like everybody knows Shane Parrish. He's famous. So I go on this podcast and he puts the video out, and that video now has about 500,000 views. The last time I looked at it, it had just crested 500,000 and still going up. It's like been out there 6 months. And it's got tons of comments on it and everybody loves it. And if you look at his channel, I'm one of the top videos, which is kind of funny because he talks to famous people like Andrew Huberman who have, like, a huge following. And there's me, in between Andrew Huberman and Naval, who's a really famous startup guy. There's me, who nobody knows, in the middle, talking about my weird niche positioning topic, and 500,000 views. Now, how much business do you think I got from that? Like, how many calls did I
Well,
get
with
saying,
the way
hey,
you say that, I'm thinking 0.
one?
Yeah,
I got one call from a person, and they're not really in my target, although we might end up doing some work together because I love them and that, and they got a neat business and it's quite big. It's not really tech. I mainly work with tech businesses, but it's kind of tech adjacent. So we might do some business together, but I only got one call. And what I got was a flood of calls from, like, my nephew called me, went, "Oh my God."
right.
My cousin called me up, and some guy, I haven't talked to since university sent me an email and said, "Oh my God, you're famous."
You became top of mind somehow.
So it was very good for my ego. Like, I could point at this thing and say, look at the views on that. That's amazing. But not very good for my business. So, it reinforced to me that for me and my business in particular, um, I do a niche thing for a niche type of client. And it isn't so much about just getting my brand out there anywhere in general, because I can have 500,000 views on a podcast and a stream of comments saying, wow, this is amazing, and make no money. Although it was fun. I don't regret doing it. But so I'm really about, if I'm going to do this video stuff, how do I get it in front of the right people?
Right.
So the video stuff I've been doing with my own podcast, it's on YouTube. But I'm using it more on LinkedIn and other places, and I have clips running on things. I've run a lot of failed experiments with video, like um, Instagram isn't really where my people hang out. TikTok is obviously not where my people hang out, but I ran an experiment just to see because I thought maybe I'm missing a TikTok trick here.
Yeah.
Um, and but YouTube has been good, and there's been this kind of steady growth over time. It's not a big audience for me, but it's enough, and I hear about it enough from clients that I think it's valuable enough to keep doing.
Okay. That's great intel. Thank you for sharing that. And the big buzz in the industry, AI. What are you doing with AI now? And maybe what's working and what's not with that?
I'm not doing too much with AI. I'm messing around a lot with it, but I haven't found a set of use cases that I think are really good for my work. Like, I think it's a fun thing to mess around with. And, and when I talk to my clients on the marketing side, they're all using AI. Like, the marketers are all using AI. They're using it a lot a lot of the folks I know are using it um, for content brainstorming. So a lot of them are like, you know, I want to write an article about something, but what does a customer like this want to know about this topic? And they'll use that for brainstorming. A lot of them are using it for, ugly first draft of something they want to write. So they get to the ugly first draft phase really clean. I don't know too many folks. Like, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a AI guy who's like super AI expert, and he said any CMO that isn't firing people in their department should get fired themselves right now because it means they're not taking enough advantage of AI. And I said, wow, that's quite a stance. And I said, what's the first person that gets fired? Name me the role. Like, what is the role we should be eliminating? And he couldn't name one. So, and that kind of dovetails with what I'm seeing. Like, people are using it as an assist,
Yeah.
as a way to speed up work, as a way to get, the ugly first draft done, get some ideas running. Some people are doing some interesting things in their workflow to try to automate little pieces of their workflow. But it's definitely not replacing full jobs at this point. It's more, I see people using it as an assist. In my stuff right now, I'm purely in the fooling around with it mode because I haven't seen anything. Like, I get a lot of AI people come to me and say, we should be able to do this positioning with AI. But the problem is we can't even do the first step of positioning with AI. Like, so the first step of positioning is, I have to understand what you should be positioning against. So if you didn't exist in the market, what would a customer do? And so what people think they can do with AI is just ask it, who competes with Salesforce or who competes with HubSpot. But what you'll get is really garbage answers. Like, the answers are really wrong. Like, that AI doesn't consider the status quo. So the idea that you're replacing a spreadsheet or replacing manual processes, it also only knows what it can peel off a website. So it might list a company because they look like Salesforce or they look like HubSpot, but they actually have 3 customers. So they never compete with Salesforce or HubSpot because they're a brand new company. And so we can't really get the answers to this at all. It would be much more efficient and much more accurate for me to just go and ask the sales team, who do we compete with? And they'll say, this is what we replace, and this is who ends up on a short list with us. So AI is not helping us at all in positioning at this point. At some point, maybe it's going to, but there's a limit on what it understands because of the data it's been trained on.
Right. Yeah. That's good for you. So,
I mean, it would be great if we could do this stuff because then, if we could get to the ugly first draft, that'd be pretty great. And then we just have to, you know, do our magic last bit on it to make it really sing. That would actually be fantastic. I would love that. But we can't even get to ugly first draft with those tools now.
right. Well, what about repurposing content? Are you finding success there? What's working and not working for you on repurposing?
Yeah, some of it. Like, I cover a lot of the same topics in my newsletter that I do on the podcast. And it's just kind of different format because some people just like to listen. That's how they consume content. I find a lot of podcast listeners are not so much into long form written content. And they have a specific time of the day where they want to consume content. They're commuting in their car, they're walking their dog, And they like to have something in their ears doing that. And those folks aren't going to sit down and read my 5,000 word essay on, well, whatever deep dive positioning thing I'm getting into. So it's been fun that way to sort of explore with the two mediums. And then, of course, that stuff goes out on YouTube. And so if you're more into watching it, you can watch it. If you want to listen to it, you can listen to it. If you want to read it, you can read it. Um, so it's not the exact same content, but I would say it's 75% the same, and so that's helping me keep my stuff out there front of mind to a bunch of folks. Um, the video stuff that I'm doing with the podcast, um, I'm doing YouTube shorts, and that seems to work quite good. So I get a lot of people talking about where they discovered my stuff on a YouTube short, and so that's interesting. Um, and then I'm using a little bit of that video on social media, although I'm not terribly active on social media anywhere except LinkedIn, because most of the folks I'm trying to get at, that's the only social media they're using right now.
Yeah. So then, with all the stuff that you are doing for content, how are you measuring performance on that?
Yeah, so again, because I really, really don't care about vanity metrics. Like, I was having a conversation with a consultant the other day, and she was talking about how many newsletter subscribers she had and how many followers she had on LinkedIn and whatever, whatever. And like, if you were to ask me how many followers I have on LinkedIn, I have no idea. I don't know, 20,000? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I literally don't know. I really don't care about that. What I care about is business. I care about cash in my jeans. And
It's a
so,
great metric.
well, this is it. And so I'm when a client reaches out to me on my website, we have a call, and in that call, I am grilling them about how did you find me? What content of mine did you consume? And so this was why I thought the podcast at the beginning was a failure, because nobody ever mentioned the podcast. Nobody ever mentioned the videos with the podcast. Where I was like, this is a waste of money. Never, let's kill this thing. But then I decided to, lean into season two and spread it out a little bit. And now I'm hearing quite a bit of that. So that's how I measure success on this content. Like if nobody ever said to me, "Oh yeah, I read your stuff on the newsletter," I'd can the newsletter.
Yeah,
Like that's how it works around here.
yeah,
I used to spend a lot of effort on Twitter, and at some point, and I have quite a big following on Twitter at one point, and not just a big following, a really engaged following, the right kind of followers. And then at some point, whenever it was, a couple of years ago, the algorithm changed. I don't know what happened, but things posts where that used to get 1,000 folks engaging, started getting almost none. And more importantly, my clients stopped talking about it. And so, at one point, people would say, "Oh, I saw you did this thing on Twitter," or "I found you on Twitter," or "I follow you on Twitter." I never hear that now. And so I just abandoned Twitter, even though I had lots of followers. I'd spent a lot of time there. I'd invested quite a bit, but it was clear when I saw the drop in engagement, it actually reflected this drop in interest from the folks that I sell to. So I just quit. So that's how I measure this stuff. Do clients get talking about it? If they don't talk about it, then why am I doing it?
yeah. Cash and jeans metric.
Cash and jeans. Like it's really that.
Yeah,
Like I don't spend any time. Like if I wanted to juice follower metrics, there's lots of ways you can do that
yeah,
if you just want to make yourself feel better and say, I really need to have 50,000 followers on LinkedIn, then I would post memes all day because that kind of content plays well. But what would those followers be? Would they be the CEO of a reasonably sized tech company that might hire me to do positioning work? Not if I'm posting memes all day.
yeah,
So, I'm really not interested in trying to juice a number to make myself feel better.
yeah,
Like I would sooner have 2,000 CEOs following me than 50,000 marketing consultants or junior people that are never going to hire me, laughing at my memes.
yeah. Okay. So as we wrap up here, if you could kind of take all this stuff that we talked about and condense it down into one little silver golden nugget for a takeaway, what would be your biggest piece of marketing advice for content marketers out there today?
I think you really gotta know your audience, right? Like, again, you really gotta understand what is the point? Like, at a million feet, what is the point? And so if the goal on this stuff is to drive some business with a certain kind of person, well, what's that certain kind of person wanna see in a consultant before they call them and hire them? Or what does that person wanna see in a company? And then where do I go intercept them where they're hanging out? And it's fine to run some experiments, but some of the experiments are going to fail, and you just got to cut it and say, you know what, I spent that. There were some good years on Twitter there, man, but they ain't there now. I'm out.
Okay.
Same thing with, when I first started making videos for the podcast, I had a production company I was working with. They were very excited about TikTok. And I was like, I don't know if the CEO of a tech company of a reasonable size selling B2B, really chunky technical stuff consumes a lot of TikTok content, but let's try it. I don't know. What do I know? Maybe I'm stupid. And it turned out they don't. So I cut it.
Yeah.
But I was curious enough to run the experiment. Now, do I think I'm an excellent TikToker? No. But the experiment was quite decisive. Like, I mean, there was nothing.
Yeah.
So I think you really got to understand your audience, play around with some stuff, but if it's not working, don't get married to it. Like, if a particular channel or particular type of content's not working, just kill it and move on. And then the other thing I would tell you is, like, sometimes really boring stuff. Like, let me tell you, the buyer's guide, don't sleep on that.
So
That's
there's
my
two
tip for you.
takeaways: buyer's guide and know your audience. Both kind of the same thing in a way. So, all right. Well,
If
that's
you're B2B and you don't have a buyer's guide, I don't know what you're doing, people.
yeah.
This is easy.
All right. Well, that's sage advice from April Dunford. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate all your insights. And yeah, thanks again for joining us.